At Willow Ridge High, silence was the safest uniform, and Zariah Cole wore it well, until one ordinary lunch period turned into a battleground. A hand yanked her hair. Laughter echoed. Phones rose. But this time, something ancient stirred in her veins. No more shrinking, no more running. In that split-second breath before the storm, she remembered everything her father taught her. And then, she flipped the story, right in front of everyone. Because sometimes, stillness is just the start of resistance. The bus ride into Willow Ridge was silent, except for the soft creak of old leather seats and the hum of tires on asphalt. Outside the window, the town passed in slow motion. Brick storefronts with peeling signs, a shuttered movie theater, and American flags faded to pink. The sidewalks were clean, the lawns trimmed, the houses too quiet. It was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen and where no one ever wanted anything to change. 16-year-old Zariah Cole sat in the last row, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her breath fogged faintly against the window, though it was not cold. She wore a white button-down shirt, snug against her frame, the collar forming a neat V at her chest. Her navy blue pleated skirt barely brushed the middle of her thighs. Her short natural curls were pulled into a tidy bun, and her black Converse were spotless. She had chosen the outfit carefully. Not to be noticed, but to leave no room for critique. The bus pulled to a stop in front of Willow Ridge High School, a building of red brick and white trim that looked more like a courthouse than a place of learning. Zariah stood, adjusted the strap of her backpack, and stepped off the bus into a town that did not blink. It had been exactly 47 days since Chicago, 47 days since the hallway doors slammed behind her, since her mother's face had crumpled in the kitchen, since her father's name had been said out loud. She had not cried that night. Not the next night either. She had promised herself, no more cracks. But Willow Ridge had cracks of its own, deep ones, hairline fractures running under every word, every stare, every silence. Inside, the hallways were wide and white and blindingly clean. Locker doors clicked like gunmetal. Students moved in small, polished clusters. There were glances, but they slid past her like wind against glass. She made no eye contact. She did not need to. She had already read the room. She moved carefully, counting steps to her locker. 104. East Wing. Fourth from the corner. She found it, opened it, slipped her bag inside. Then she turned, and it happened. She did not see him coming. Just a blur of red and gold. A shoulder slammed into hers hard enough to jolt her back against the lockers. The air caught in her throat. "Watch it." The voice was deep and casual, as if she had bumped into a piece of furniture that spoke. She looked up. He was tall, over 6 feet, with sandy blonde hair, a sharp jaw, and a red varsity jacket slung over broad shoulders. His letter patch read, WHS, football. Beneath it, Whitmore. His eyes traveled slowly from her face to her skirt and back again. "Oh," he said, the corners of his mouth lifting. "New girl." Zariah swallowed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to You didn't mean to what? Exist?" Behind him, 3 other boys chuckled, their laughter low and rehearsed. They wore the same jackets, the same swagger. But only he looked directly at her, studying her not like a person, but like something left on the floor. He leaned in, just enough that she could smell cologne and ego. "You're from Chicago, right?" She nodded once. "Figures," he said. "Bet you think you're some tough city girl." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Just a heads up, this town's not like your side of the tracks." Zariah blinked. Her fingers clenched around her locker door. She said nothing. "Yeah," he muttered, stepping back. "That's what I thought." She waited until they walked away before releasing the breath in her chest. Her heart pounded so loudly she could feel it in her throat, but she did not cry. She straightened her spine, closed her locker, and turned toward homeroom. Behind her, the boy named Whitmore turned to his friends and said, loud enough to echo, "She'll fold by homecoming." By 7:45 in the morning, Zariah Cole had memorized the layout of Willow Ridge High, not the official version in maps and directories, but the unspoken one. Which hallways held the quiet teachers, which stairwells were watched by security cameras, which lockers were safe to lean against, and which were claimed territory. She had only been here a few hours, but her instincts had been trained in a different kind of classroom, one where silence was both shield and weapon. She moved like vapor through her first 2 periods, always sitting one seat from the corner, always answering only when asked. Her white shirt clung to her back beneath her backpack, her pleated skirt folding sharply at the knees every time she sat down. Her breathing remained steady, eyes forward, lips closed. Every step was measured, every moment rehearsed. By the time the bell rang for 3rd period, her body had not relaxed once. Advanced Placement American Literature was in room 212, on the 2nd floor near the east-facing windows. She arrived 3 minutes early and chose a desk in the center of the room. Neutral territory, she thought. Not the front row, where students drew attention. Not the back, where alliances lived. She set her notebook down gently and began arranging her pens in color order. It gave her hands something to do, something to hold. The scent of old books and dry erase markers lingered in the air. On the whiteboard, in neat cursive, Chapter 1, The Great Gatsby. What do we mean when we say the American dream? Zariah felt something almost like hope. Literature had always been a kind of shelter, words that gave her voice when the world refused to listen. And then the shadow fell across her desk. "You are in my seat." Zariah looked up. The girl standing above her was flawless in the way yearbook covers tried to be. Long blonde hair twisted into a loose braid. A designer tote bag slung across one shoulder. Her uniform skirt was rolled just slightly higher than regulation. Lip gloss shimmered under fluorescent lights. Her name would come later, Brielle Ashton. But in this moment, she did not need to introduce herself. Her presence was declaration enough. I did not see any assigned seats," Zariah said softly. "They are not assigned," Brielle said, her voice calm and cruel. "But that one has been mine since sophomore year." Zariah glanced at the other chairs. Half were empty. "I can move." "No," another voice interrupted. A boy stepped between them. He was tall, lean, with smooth dark skin and soft features. His eyes were steady but unreadable, and his hands were speckled with paint, red, blue, and gold. He wore no varsity jacket, no school colors, just a gray hoodie with sleeves pushed to his elbows and charcoal-stained fingers gripping a sketch pad. "That seat is not hers anymore," he said. "Lindsay graduated last spring. The seat is open." Brielle's eyes narrowed. "I was not talking to you, Deshawn." He ignored her. "She is new. Let her breathe." For a moment, the room paused, stretched thin between confrontation and retreat. Brielle's mouth curled, not into a smile, but something close. "Whatever you say," she murmured. Then she turned to Zariah, lowering her voice. "Just remember, at this school people who do not know their place tend to disappear." She walked to the back row without looking back. 2 other girls followed, whispering behind their hands. Zariah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The boy, Deshawn, slid into the seat next to hers and returned to sketching, as if nothing had happened. "Thank you," Zariah said. He nodded once without looking up. "Do not thank me. She will come harder next time." The teacher entered a moment later and began the lecture. But Zariah heard nothing. Her hands shook faintly beneath the desk. Her stomach turned like wet paper. It was not the insult itself that left her shaken. It was how expected it had felt. As if she had walked straight into a role she never auditioned for. The bell rang 50 minutes later. As students gathered their things, Deshawn leaned closer. "She does not represent everyone here," he said quietly. "But enough of them." "Oh." Zariah nodded. She is one of those people who know how to smile without moving their eyes. Deshawn finally looked at her then, and for a heartbeat, something passed between them. Not pity, recognition. "She has claws," he said. "But she rarely strikes first." That was her warning shot. Zariah gathered her books and followed the crowd into the hallway. She returned to her locker between fourth and fifth period. The hallway was quiet. She turned the combination carefully, opened the metal door, and froze. There, taped to the inside, was a single piece of paper. Cheap printer stock, bold black letters in all caps, scrawled as if shouting without sound. Transfer trash. No name, no handwriting, no signature, but none was needed. Zariah stared at the words for a long time. Then, with the same hands that once held her father's belts and mitts, she tore the paper down, folded it twice, and slid it into her back pocket. She did not cry. Instead, she changed her route to class, avoided the East Wing bathrooms, walked with her eyes down and her fists in her pockets. Willow Ridge High was not a battlefield. It was a theater. Everyone playing a part, every insult rehearsed. During sixth period, she caught Brielle watching her. No glare, no laughter, just a whisper, low and cold, shared between her and the girl beside her. Just wait till lunch. Lunch at Willow Ridge High was not a break. It was an audition. The cafeteria was wide and echoing, flooded with too much light and too little warmth. Circular tables were grouped like territories, each claimed by tribes that had long drawn invisible borders. Athletes here, cheerleaders there, music kids against the far wall. There was no food line, only a slow, mechanical current of bodies moving in semi-silence. The smell of hot cheese, bleach, and anticipation hung heavy in the air. Zariah Cole stood at the entrance, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. Turkey sandwich, chocolate milk, apple slices in a plastic cup. She had chosen every item, not for taste, but for safety. Nothing too messy, nothing too heavy, nothing that could be used against her. She scanned the cafeteria. There was one empty table in the far back corner, half hidden behind a pillar. 37 steps. She counted them in her head, one for each day since she had stepped off the train from Chicago, one for each morning she had promised herself she would not break. She began to walk. Step 1, step 2, step 3. The world narrowed around her. Conversations softened. Laughter dropped in pitch. Her skirt brushed against her knees as she moved carefully, steadily, tray-balanced like glass. Step 24. A shoe jutted out from under a table. Zariah did not see it. Step 25. And the world flipped. The tray launched from her hands. Milk burst into the air like an exclamation, sandwich flying apart mid-spin. Zariah's knees scraped hard against the linoleum, her palms slapping the ground with a dull smack. Pain flared in both elbows. A gasp rippled through the cafeteria, followed by something worse. Silence. Zariah blinked, dazed, and looked up. The milk had landed squarely on Ryder Whitmore's chest. He stood slowly, deliberately, chocolate streaks dripping down his crimson varsity jacket like blood. His mouth hung open in disbelief, then twisted into something darker. "You have got to be kidding me," he said. Zariah scrambled to her feet. Her knees ached. Her hands were wet. "I did not see. Someone tripped." "I do not care what happened," Ryder snapped, stepping closer. Students leaned in from all sides. Phones lifted. The air thickened. Zariah opened her mouth to speak again, but Ryder's hand shot out, not to strike, but to humiliate. He grabbed a fistful of her bun and yanked. Hard. Pain jolted through her scalp like fire. Her neck wrenched backward. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, not from fear but from fury. She heard someone gasp. Someone else laughed. No one moved. "You think you're special?" Ryder hissed into her ear. "Walking in here like you matter?" Zariah's breath came in short, shallow bursts. His grip tightened. "This is my school," he said. You are just another charity case." The cafeteria stood still. She could smell his cologne again, sharp and synthetic. Her eyes darted around. Students watched with faces frozen in their own calculations. A few mouths twitched with something like amusement. Others looked away. But no one, intervened. Zariah's hands hovered midair, her fingers curled in. And then a voice rose, not from outside, but from the depths of memory. A voice that lived in her marrow. You wait until you can't. Her father had said it once, late at night in the old garage back in Chicago. She had been 10, holding back tears after losing a sparring round. Her father, still in his uniform from the job he would later lose, had crouched beside her, wrapped her bruised wrists in cloth, and whispered, "It's not about winning. It's about knowing when it is time. You wait, baby girl. You wait until you can't." Zariah stared straight ahead, into the wide eyes of a younger girl at the next table, who watched with trembling hands. Her face reflected back something raw, something helpless. Zariah's fists tightened. "Not yet," Ryder laughed, low and satisfied. He let go, wiping his hand on his soaked jacket, as if touching her had dirtied him. She staggered back, shoulders hunched. The pain in her scalp throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Ryder turned to walk away, throwing one final glance over his shoulder. "Next time, keep your head down." Zariah said nothing, but something had cracked. Not broken, not yet, but cracked, like ice too long under pressure. The crowd began to move again. Voices returned in quiet murmurs. Laughter drifted from corners. Phones slid back into pockets. Someone near the vending machines uploaded a clip to a private student group. No caption, no commentary, just the image of Zariah kneeling on the cafeteria floor, her chocolate milk seeping into Ryder's shoes. Moments later, another student added a caption to the repost. "The new girl's countdown starts now." Zariah Cole sat on the back steps of the art wing, her tray untouched beside her, the chocolate milk still sealed. The concrete beneath her thighs was warm from the early afternoon sun, but her fingers were cold. She had wrapped them in the sleeves of her uniform blouse, curled into herself like something cornered. Her hair still ached where Ryder had grabbed her. The skin of her scalp burned as if the humiliation had left a brand. She had replayed the moment 100 times since it happened. The fall. The milk. The grip on her bun. The silence. And worst of all, the crowd. Dozens of eyes, wide and watchful. Not one of them had moved. She was still sitting there when Deshaun Rivers found her. He stood just outside the shade line, sketchbook tucked under one arm, his other hand holding an apple that looked like it had not been touched. His shadow fell across the stone like a question. "You should not be out here alone." Zariah looked up, blinking against the light. "Why?" He sat beside her without waiting for permission. He did not smell like cologne or sweat, but like pencil shavings and acrylic paint. "Because this school has rules," he said. "I know the handbook," Zariah replied. Her voice was flat. Deshaun shook his head. "Not those rules." He opened the sketchbook on his lap. Inside was a drawing half-finished. A figure falling, hair caught in midair, arms flailing against invisible hands. He did not show her the page, but she glimpsed enough to know who it was. "There are rules here no one writes down," he said. "But everyone learns them." Zariah stayed still. 1. Never walk alone in the east hallway between 4th and 5th period. That is when the football team comes out of weight training. They do not like to share the space. She said nothing. 2. Never sit in the last 2 rows of the cafeteria. That is where the seniors watch for prey. "Oh," he continued calmly, like someone reading an old bedtime story. 3. Never look Brielle Ashton in the eye. She takes that personally. She was homecoming queen sophomore year. She believes it made her royalty. Zariah gave a small, bitter laugh. "So I am in trouble for existing," Deshaun shrugged. "Existing loudly." He turned the page in his sketchbook, revealing a charcoal portrait of someone Zariah did not recognize. A man with strong cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and eyes full of contradiction. "You draw everyone?" she asked. "Number just the ones who make noise, or leave marks." Zariah looked down at her lap. Her fingers picked at the hem of her skirt, the stitching pulled loose by the fall in the cafeteria. "My father taught me how to fight," she said suddenly. Deshaun waited. He was a defensive tactics officer, taught at the academy in Chicago. Judo, Krav Maga, all of it. Deshaun tilted his head. Impressive. Zariah shook hers. It did not save him. She paused. He stopped an off-duty cop from choking a kid during an arrest, tried to pull the man back. They said he assaulted a fellow officer, said he escalated the situation. He was arrested on the spot, stripped of his badge in 48 hours. Deshaun's face was still listening. They made an example of him, she whispered, and I watched him unravel. In that garage, where he taught me to protect myself, I watched him fall apart. She lifted her gaze to the trees lining the parking lot. I promised I would never raise my hands like that. I promised I would not become what they called him. There was silence. Then Deshaun said, "What they called him is not what he was." She did not answer. Deshaun looked down at his sketch pad. You promised never to fight. That is noble. But this place, this school, it does not want your promises. It wants your surrender. I do not want to be anyone's target, Zariah said. That decision was never yours, Deshaun replied. The bell rang overhead. 5th period. Zariah stood slowly, brushed the dirt from the back of her skirt. Her hair shifted slightly in the breeze, still tight in its bun, still tender at the root. Thanks, she said quietly. Deshaun nodded. Just do not walk alone. She did not. For the next 2 days, she clung to the invisible rules. She avoided the east wing between classes. She sat near the front in the cafeteria, where the noise was louder and more chaotic, but oddly safer. She kept her eyes on the floor when Brielle passed. She said nothing, but silence does not always keep you safe. On Thursday, during 6th period, she raised her hand to ask a question about the symbolism in The Great Gatsby. Mrs. Chen smiled, said it was a good observation. A few students nodded. Brielle did not. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. At 3 o'clock, the final bell rang. Zariah entered the girls' restroom near the art wing. It was empty. She washed her hands slowly, the faucet squeaking under pressure. Behind her, the door opened. She saw them in the mirror, Brielle, and 2 others. They moved in silence. Zariah turned, instinct prickling at the back of her neck. I was just leaving, she said. Brielle smiled. It was the kind of smile that belonged in glass, not on a face. Not before we fix something. Zariah stepped back. One of the girls moved to block the exit. She tried to reach for the stall. Too late. Fingers seized her bun, pulling hard. The sharp, sickening sound of scissors. No. A lock of her hair fell to the floor. Another followed. Zariah's breath caught. Her body went rigid. Relax, Brielle whispered, slicing through another section. I'm just helping. You wanted to fit in, right? A final snip. Laughter echoed like metal in the tiled room. Zariah stood frozen, hands trembling, rage swelling beneath her skin like steam under glass. The girls left, and 10 minutes later, a photo appeared on at Willow Ridge Social, the school's anonymous Instagram account. It was her, head tilted, hair jagged, caption, fixed her roots. The art room was always colder than the rest of the school. The windows were sealed shut with old gray putty, and the paint on the walls curled at the edges like dried leaves. But it was the only room Zariah Cole could walk into without bracing her body for impact. No laughter here, no heels clicking, no whispers. Just the scent of turpentine, wet brushes, and silence. She had started coming in during lunch, not every day, not openly, but often enough that she had memorized the layout. Brushes organized by size, jars of cloudy water, sketches taped along the wall, some smudged by careless hands, a drying rack with half-finished portraits stacked like quiet confessions. Deshaun Rivers was always there before her. He never looked up when she entered, never greeted her. But he left the stool near the corner window empty, the one with the softest light and the most chipped paint. That was his way of saying welcome. Zariah sat quietly, the tips of her fingers still raw from gripping the edges of the bathroom sink 2 days ago. Her bun was gone. What was left of her hair clung to her scalp in awkward lengths, uneven and exposed. She had not cried, not in the mirror, not in front of her mother. Not even when her phone lit up with the photo Brielle posted, her image broken and reshaped into mockery. She had not cried, but her chest had gone hollow in a way that felt like mourning. Now, she watched Deshawn paint. His canvas was large, too large for a student assignment, and pinned to the easel with worn clips. He painted in long, smooth strokes, his brush moving like a conductor's baton. His eyes never blinked while working, and he breathed in rhythm with the bristles. At first, Zariah could not tell what it was. Just a swirl of deep blues and charcoal. Then the shape began to emerge. A girl, thin arms, knees drawn in, hair like seaweed floating above her head. The girl was sinking, or maybe being swallowed. The water rose in furious, curved lines, indigo, navy, midnight. The girl's mouth was open, but no sound came. Her hands reached upward, not in a scream, but in surrender. Zariah leaned closer. "You see her?" Deshawn asked without looking away. Zariah nodded. "She is drowning." "No," Deshawn said, "she is being erased." His brush paused at the base of the canvas. "Do you know what color bruises turn before they fade?" Zariah's lips parted, but she said nothing. "Blue," he said. "Right before the yellow comes. Blue is the truth showing through." She stared at the painting again, at the girl who was no one and everyone. Deshawn stepped back, setting the brush down carefully on the ledge. He wiped his hands on a paint-smeared towel. "I painted her 2 years ago," he said. "Started and stopped. Could never finish." Zariah glanced at him. "Why not?" "I was waiting to meet her." Their eyes met, and for the first time, Deshawn did not look away. Zariah exhaled through her nose. "What happened to you?" The question surprised both of them. Deshawn sat on the edge of the table across from her. He stared down at his paint-covered hands, as if searching for the answer between his knuckles. "Freshman year," he said slowly. "I ran for student council. Pushed a proposal for equity training after 2 kids got suspended for threatening behavior during lunch. One of them was me. The other was a boy who sat next to me and wore a Black Lives Matter pin." He paused. "During the campaign debate, I called out Ryder, told the room he was protected, said what everyone knew and no one admitted." Zariah's chest tightened. "What happened?" "I won the vote, but a week later, the council removed me, said I was too divisive, that I made people uncomfortable." Principal signed off. "My father, who is also the vice principal, was told to manage the optics." Zariah's eyes widened. "Your father," Deshawn gave a bitter smile. "He told me the world does not change by being loud. It changes by surviving long enough to matter. That is cruel. That is survival." To him, Zariah looked at the painting again. The water, the girl, the blue. "And to you?" she asked. "I think silence is the real weapon," he said. "But it is never aimed at the ones who deserve it." Zariah stood, her legs slightly unsteady. "I am starting to wonder," she said, "if this place is built to keep people quiet." Deshawn picked up his sketchbook. "It is not just the students." She turned to him. "What do you mean?" He handed her a folded sheet of paper. "Someone slid this under the art room door this morning. It is from a teacher. I do not know who." Zariah unfolded the page. It was printed in block text, no name attached. "Stay quiet. You do not know who is watching." The words blurred for a moment, then sharpened. Zariah looked at Deshawn. His voice was quiet. "We are not supposed to speak." She folded the note and slid it into her bag. "I think it is time someone did." It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that looked harmless from the outside. Sky washed clean, sun glinting off locker handles, and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifting from the cafeteria like a lie. Birds chirped, the flag waved, the illusion of order remained intact. But something had shifted beneath the surface. Zariah Cole felt it as soon as she stepped onto campus. The silence around her was not absence, it was anticipation. By noon, she knew something was coming. It was in the way students looked at her but did not speak. The way Brielle smiled at her from across the hallway, too sweet, too sharp. The way Ryder passed her at the water fountain and said nothing, only tapped the side of her head with 2 fingers like he was winding a clock. Deshaun noticed too. "You might want to eat in the art room," he had said before lunch, his voice low. But Zariah shook her head. "I am tired of hiding." Deshaun gave her a long look, then simply nodded and said, "Then do not flinch." The cafeteria was louder than usual. Not in volume, but in presence. Every table was filled, yet it felt like everybody was watching. Zariah entered through the side entrance, holding her tray like a shield. She made no eye contact, but her spine remained straight. She reached a table near the front, away from the cameras. But today there were too many phones, held casually, set on trays, angled perfectly. She sat down, unwrapped her sandwich, bit into it once. That was when the footsteps came. Slow, deliberate, a beat too quiet to be natural. Zariah looked up. Ryder Whitmore stood in front of her, holding an open water bottle. His varsity jacket clung to his frame, red and gold under the harsh lights. The bottle's cap spun in his fingers. His face held a smile that did not touch his eyes. Zariah did not move. "Hey, Chicago," he said. She remained still. "I figured after the milk incident you might need a rinse." The bottle tipped. A sudden cascade of freezing water hit her head, soaking her hair, her shoulders, the front of her white blouse. Gasps erupted around them. A single fry slipped from her tray, hit the table, and fell to the floor. But Zariah did not flinch. She did not wipe her face. She did not lower her head. She stood. The soaked fabric clung to her torso, her skirt heavy with water. Her curls, uneven from Brielle's scissors, now hung limp against her temples. But her posture remained unchanged. She turned, not toward Ryder, but toward the girl seated 2 tables away, holding her phone up at a perfect angle. Zariah looked directly into the camera. The room stilled. For a second, just one, no one spoke. Even the buzzing fluorescent lights seemed to hush. She did not cry. She did not run. She stood drenched in the center of the cafeteria and stared down the lens like it owed her something. Her hands were at her sides, fists gently closed. The air thickened. Then Brielle's voice broke the stillness. "Oh, look," she said with a slow chuckle. "She thinks she is Rosa Parks." A few scattered laughs followed, nervous, forced. Ryder threw the empty bottle onto Zariah's tray. "There, now we are even." He turned and walked away. But this time, the silence did not return. It cracked. Something in the crowd shifted, eyes flickering from Zariah's soaked blouse to the path Ryder left behind. Phones came down, but no one looked away. Zariah gathered her things in silence. Water dripped from her sleeve as she picked up her tray and walked it to the trash bin. Her shoes squeaked slightly as she crossed the tile floor. She did not tremble. She did not look back. She exited the cafeteria through the same side door she had entered. The moment she was gone, the room erupted, not in chaos, but in confusion. A rustling, a flicker, a ripple through the system. Deshaun watched from his table, his jaw tight. Brielle stared at her phone, but her fingers hesitated before posting. Zariah walked home alone that afternoon. Her mother was working a double shift at the hospital. The apartment was quiet, curtains drawn, the hallway dim. She passed the living room without turning on the lights, went into her bedroom, and changed into dry clothes without looking in the mirror. Then she opened the hall closet. There, near the bottom, beneath old board games and a broken space heater, sat the box she had not touched since they moved. The cardboard was frayed at the corners, the lid taped twice over. She peeled it open gently, dust clinging to the folds. Inside, her father's brown belt, his training gloves worn smooth at the palms, a stack of photos, him in uniform, him teaching her throws in the garage, him smiling as she landed her first clean takedown. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a faded towel, her own wrist wraps, white once, now tinged gray with time. Zariah sat on the floor. The apartment was silent, the air still. Slowly, methodically, she unrolled the wraps and began winding them around her hands, over the knuckles. across the wrist, around the thumb. Her breathing remained calm. There were no words in the room, only the quiet sound of cloth against skin. At Willow Ridge High, the world returned to its usual rhythm the next morning. Lockers clattering, sneakers squeaking, bells echoing through polished hallways. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. It was not in the schedule, nor in the walls. It was in the silence. Zarya Kol felt it. The moment she stepped onto campus, the weight of unseen gazes pressed against her spine. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just the transfer girl. She was the girl who stood tall with water dripping from her hair, the girl who stared into a camera lens like it was the barrel of a gun and did not blink. And now she was a countdown. No one said it aloud, but they were waiting. By the time fourth period ended, the tension had ripened into expectation. Whispers flowed like electricity. Deshawn passed her a folded slip of paper during AP History. One line, written in sharp pencil strokes. "Do not eat alone." She read it, folded it twice, slipped it into her shoe. Zarya had not come to Willow Ridge to fight. She had come to survive. But surviving here had started to feel like betrayal. The fabric wraps around her hands had not been for vanity. They were not for drama. They were her father's, stained, faded, but strong. She had taken them from the box in the closet after drying her hair in silence the night before. Not because she planned to strike, because she needed to remember the rhythm of breath, the rhythm of stillness, the rhythm of knowing when enough is enough. By the time the lunch bell rang, the hallways buzzed with an electricity that no bell could silence. Phones were ready, cameras were warmed, students flocked to the cafeteria like pilgrims to a spectacle. Zarya walked alone. Each step measured, not heavy, not fast, just deliberate. Her white blouse clung to her frame, tucked neatly into her pleated navy skirt. Her hair was tied into a tight bun again, despite the pain in her scalp from yesterday's pull. She had redone it carefully, strand by strand, as if daring the world to try again. As she entered the cafeteria, time fractured. The room of 300 students seemed to pause in unison. Trays froze mid-air, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the air seemed to hush. She did not flinch. She walked to the same table as the day before, corner seat, closest to the windows. She placed her tray down quietly, removed the plastic wrap from a sandwich, folded it once, and waited. The first click of cleats against tile came 30 seconds later. Ryder Whitmore. He did not rush. That was not his style. He sauntered toward her like a storm rolling in, slow, sure, full of arrogance. Two of his teammates flanked him, not laughing, not smirking, just watching, waiting. He stopped behind her, close enough for her to feel the heat of his breath against her ear. The room was silent. Zarya did not turn. He leaned closer, only inches between them now, close enough for the whole room to see. Close enough to be on every phone screen within seconds. Then, his hand moved. His fingers found the base of her bun and pulled. Hard! It was not teasing this time. It was not high school cruelty masked in jest. It was punishment. Her neck snapped back. A sharp pain tore across her scalp. The tray clattered. Her sandwich dropped to the floor, but she did not cry out. Zarya's eyes opened wide, staring up at the ceiling's white tiles. Then, closed. One breath in, one beat out. She remembered her father's words. Never strike first, but never kneel twice. She rose, her spine aligned, her knees steady, her feet silent on the tile. Ryder's hand was still in her hair, but now, so was hers. Her right hand gripped his wrist with precision, thumb pressing into the radial nerve, fingers curling over bone. Her left arm shifted to her center, her foot stepped behind his, and her hips turned. Soinaji, a shoulder throw, born of discipline, refined through breath, delivered without anger. Zarya bent at the waist, pivoted, and in a clean motion used Ryder's own weight against him. He lifted. The cafeteria gasped. His legs left the ground. His body hung for a fraction of a second in the air, an inverted silhouette framed by fluorescent light. Then, impact! Ryder slammed flat on his back. A thundering sound cracked across the cafeteria floor. Trays rattled, drinks spilled. Phones dropped. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Zariah stood over him, her hair falling loose, strands dancing near her eyes. She did not speak. She did not smile. Ryder writhed on the floor, his face twisted in shock, not pain. His lungs fought for air. One of his teammates stepped forward, then stopped. Something in her eyes made him freeze. Zariah did not look at him. She looked at the crowd, and they looked back, some with awe, some with fear, some with shame. She had broken no rule of discipline. She had simply decided not to be broken. A single girl in a skirt, her knuckles wrapped in cloth, her silence now louder than any scream. The silence cracked when someone dropped their phone. The plastic shell skidded across the floor, and then the speaker above them came to life. Zariah Cole, please report to the principal's office. Immediately. New emotion, new delay, just authority. Zariah blinked once, then stepped back. Ryder still had not moved. A murmur traveled through the room like wind through trees. Did you see that? No way she learned that here. That was judo. Real judo. Someone whispered her name like a warning. Another whispered it like a prayer. Zariah turned. She did not gather her tray. She did not fix her hair. She simply walked. Out of the cafeteria, past the phones, past the stairs, toward whatever came next. The principal's office had cold air and colder eyes. Zariah sat upright in the vinyl chair, her back rigid, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The overhead light hummed. A clock ticked softly, as if daring her to blink first. But she did not. Across the desk, Principal Keating flipped through the disciplinary report without looking up. "You could have walked away," he said finally. Zariah held her silence. Not because she had no words, but because none of them would be heard. "You understand the policy," he continued. "Zero tolerance. Physical retaliation is a violation, regardless of context." Zariah said, clearly and slowly, "So is assault." He paused. His fingers froze on the page. "Ryder will receive a 3-day suspension," he said without meeting her eyes. "You will receive 5. The breath caught in her throat. Not from surprise, but from the confirmation of what she already knew. This was never about fairness. "This is not punishment," he added, tone rehearsed. "It is protection. For everyone." She stood without being asked. "Protection," she repeated. "From me." He opened his mouth to reply, but she was already gone. Her mother stood waiting just outside the building, arms folded, posture like steel. Yolanda Cole was not the type to raise her voice. She was the type who made silence feel like thunder. In the car, the drive home passed in tight-lipped stillness. The only sound was the rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers, brushing away a thin drizzle. Finally, parked in the driveway, Yolanda spoke. "I need you to know something, Zariah. You did not embarrass me." Zariah turned toward her mother, surprised. Her mother's eyes were glassy but sharp. "You reminded me of your father," Yolanda said. "Right down to the way you stood up and did not flinch." Zariah blinked slowly. "But," her mother added, voice firming like concrete setting, "this ends here. You will not carry this weight alone. I will not let them write your story like they wrote his." 2 days later, 5 mothers sat in Yolanda Cole's living room. They did not come with cookies or whispers. They came with documents, printouts, archived screenshots, and stories of their own daughters who had been cornered, mocked, pushed, recorded, and told to stay quiet. Mrs. Reeves, Mrs. Holloway, Miss Benton, Mrs. Green. Each one had skin that had been ignored in the same offices. Each one had a child who had learned to carry silence like armor. And none of them wanted to wait anymore. "We are not going to the district," Mrs. Holloway said, her voice clipped. "They will sweep this under faster than bleach on a crime scene." "We are going to the public," Yolanda replied. 3 days after the incident, the Willow Ridge Gazette published an open letter on its website and social pages. The title was simple: "If justice will not happen in school, we will bring it through community." The letter cited not just Zariah's suspension, but a pattern, a chain of selective discipline going back years, always disproportionately harming students of color. It included anonymized quotes, statistics, and 4 screenshots of past social media posts mocking black students that had gone unpunished. Within hours, the post was shared over 4,000 times. Within 1 day, it reached the inboxes of 2 school board members. And within 48 hours, it reached TikTok. Not through the letter, but through the flip. The video was 24 seconds long, shot from 3 angles. One student had synced it to music. Slow-motion orchestral beats timed to the throw. The crash. The silence that followed. Within 2 days, it passed 1 million views. Comments exploded. "She moved like a real fighter. That was not luck. This is why we learned self-defense. Protect yourself." Notice how nobody helped her. They just filmed. And she got suspended? The system is broken. So you are telling me she's the threat? But not all voices were in support. Schools are not dojos. Violence is never the answer. Why are we praising assault? There are better ways to handle bullies. The debate grew like fire in dry grass, too fast to contain, too loud to ignore. Zariah sat on her bedroom floor, the glow of her phone reflecting in her eyes. She had not said a single word online, not to defend herself, not to join in. She was tired of having to explain the right to exist without apology. Instead, she scrolled in silence, watched her face become a symbol she never asked for, watched strangers argue over her as if she were an idea and not a person, watched the world split itself in two, fracture by fracture, along the lines of perception. Downstairs, Yolanda muted the television and opened her email. In her inbox were 37 new messages from parents, alumni, and a handful of former teachers. Some were supportive, some asked questions, some warned her to be careful. She replied to all of them. Then, after a long pause, she opened the photo frame beside the fireplace. Inside, it was a picture of her late husband in uniform. The back of the frame held a folded letter, unopened since the day of his arrest. She removed it, set it beside her laptop, and began to type something new. By the evening of the 5th day, the school had issued a brief statement. "We take the safety of all our students seriously. An internal review is ongoing." No names were mentioned. No apology was offered. But that night, under the dim light of a study lamp, Zariah received a message that made her pulse tighten. It came from Deshawn. "I have something to show you." Just one sentence. But it carried weight. Because Deshawn never sent messages without reason. Because Deshawn was careful, quiet, calculating. Because Deshawn knew things. Zariah stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered above the reply box. For the first time in days, she felt something new. Not fear, not anger. Curiosity. And just beneath it, hope. Zariah replied, "When?" The typing dots pulsed. Then came his answer. "Tomorrow. Bring no one." It was just past 5 o'clock in the evening when Zariah stepped through the rusted side gate behind the old athletics shed, the air heavy with the scent of wet pine and flaking iron. The warehouse loomed ahead like something long forgotten, its corrugated walls streaked with moss, its windows boarded shut from storms that had come and gone years before. The place was no longer on the school's blueprints, Deshawn had said. It was where the ghosts were kept. Deshawn stood beside the padlocked door, hands tucked deep into his jacket pockets. He did not greet her with words. Instead, he gave a quiet nod and pulled a set of keys from his belt loop. The lock groaned open like a throat clearing secrets. Inside, the air was stale and faintly metallic. Dust swirled through the dying sunlight, slicing the shadows into fractured gold. In one corner, an old punching bag still hung from a beam. In another, a set of dented lockers leaned like drunks after a fight. "This is where it happened?" Zariah asked, though she already knew. Deshawn said nothing. He crossed the concrete floor, knelt beside a weathered toolbox, and opened the lid. From beneath the coiled wires and forgotten bolts, he pulled out a phone. Not new, not connected, just memory. He tapped the screen. The glow lit his face from below. Then he turned it toward her. The video was grainy but clear. Ryder's voice rang sharp, even through the static. He was younger, but not by much. The arrogance in his stance had not changed. Deshawn stood across from him, fists at his side, not raised. "You think being smart means you get to talk back?" Ryder's voice asked from 2 years ago. Deshawn shook his head, on the screen and beside her now. "I never talked back," he said quietly. "I just said no." The video showed the rest. A shove, a punch. Deshawn falling, not fighting. Laughter in the background. Then the camera swinging wildly before it stopped recording. "I never showed this to anyone," Deshawn said. "I was afraid that it would only make things worse, that nobody would care, or worse, that they would." Zariah looked at the screen again. Her chest tightened. The boy in the video was not weak. He was just unarmed. "He should not get to forget," she said. "Not if you still remember." Deshawn locked eyes with her. "Then we speak." She nodded. "Together." Later that night, long after the warehouse had been sealed again, Zariah sat on her front porch beneath a yellow porch light that buzzed like a tired wasp. The night smelled of rain but held no promise of it. Her mother was asleep. The windows were dark. She had been scrolling mindlessly through her messages when the footsteps came. Not loud, but deliberate. Zariah stood, instinct tensing her shoulders, until the figure stepped into the light. Ryder. He did not wear his usual armor, no Letterman jacket, no swagger, just a faded sweatshirt and eyes that looked older than the boy she had thrown to the floor. Zariah opened her mouth, but he lifted a hand, not to stop her, but to offer something. It was a photograph, old, folded. A woman with soft eyes and tired cheeks, tears streaking her face as she sat beside a hospital bed. The caption, scrawled in small black ink below the image, read, "She smiled when I fell." Zariah's breath caught. Ryder's voice was barely more than a whisper. "She was proud of me until that day. She always smiled when I won. That day, it was different." He looked away. "I do not have a speech. I do not even know if this is what people mean when they talk about making things right." Zariah stared at the photo. The image was not about her. It was not even about Deshawn. It was about a boy who had finally seen the cracks in the man he thought he had become. She did not speak. She just nodded once. And for the first time, Ryder did not fill the silence with cruelty. He simply turned and walked away. The next morning, Deshawn met her in the art room. The shades were drawn, the door locked. His laptop sat open on the corner desk, the microphone already set up. Zariah took a breath. He turned the screen toward her. "You sure?" She looked at him, then at herself in the dark reflection of the monitor. "I am done waiting," she said. Deshawn clicked open the camera. The red light glowed steady. The room fell into perfect quiet. "Ready to speak?" he asked. Zariah sat forward, and for the first time, her voice did not tremble. The red light blinked twice, recording. Zariah looked directly into the lens, and she began. 2 years ago he hit Deshawn." The auditorium was silent, as if it had forgotten how to breathe. Every student had been called from class. Every teacher stood by the walls. The polished wood of the stage, usually reserved for pep rallies and choir concerts, now held only a projector screen. No microphone, no podium, no school board speeches, just a black screen waiting to begin. Zariah sat in the front row, center aisle, her hands pressed flat against her thighs. Her mother sat behind her, silent but present. Deshawn leaned forward in his seat, elbows on his knees, head bowed, not out of fear, but preparation. The screen flickered. Then, without announcement or introduction, the video began. Deshawn appeared first. He sat in the art room, that familiar wall of blue paint behind him. His voice, when it came, was steady, unshaken. I was 14 when I said no to Ryder Sloane. Not loudly. I did not shout. I just did not laugh when he told the joke. That was enough. He paused. The screen held his stillness. He found me behind the gym 2 days later, pushed me down, told me I had forgotten my place. He reminded me. Huh? A cut to the phone footage. The shove, the punch, the laughter that cracked like glass. But the faces were blurred now. Only the voice was clear. And Deshawn's silence. Back to the art room. His eyes met the lens. I thought silence would protect me. I thought adults would step in. Neither did. Then it was Zariah. She sat where Deshawn had, her hands folded in her lap. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply spoke. When Ryder grabbed my hair in the cafeteria, I wanted to vanish, but my father once said, "You wait until you cannot." The clip of the flip played, slow motion now, no dramatic sound, just the real thud of Ryder hitting the floor and the cafeteria gasping into stillness. Zariah's voice continued over the image. I did not fight because I wanted to win. I fought because I remembered who raised me, and who tried to erase me. The screen turned black. 3 seconds. No credits, no applause. Then the lights returned, and the room, once silent, now trembled with 1,000 thoughts no one dared to say aloud. At the back of the auditorium, Jake shifted in his seat. His jaw clenched. His eyes stayed forward, but his body seemed caught between standing and running. He had been there when Deshawn fell. He had laughed. Now he felt eyes on him, but it was not the student staring. It was Ryder. Ryder stepped from the shadows near the wall, walking slowly until he stood beside Jake's chair. Not over him. Beside him. He did not raise his voice. "You are the one who taught me how to be cruel," Ryder said. "You laughed when I hesitated. You patted my back when I crossed the line. You called me a leader when I broke someone." Jake turned his face away, but Ryder kept speaking, softer now. "I followed you because I was afraid of being the target. I became the target because I forgot I had a choice. No punches, no dramatics, just truth." And for once, Jake had no clever reply. At the edge of the crowd, Principal Wheeler watched with folded arms. Her face was unreadable. But beside her, Miss Rivera, Zariah's English teacher, stood motionless, her eyes shining, not with tears, but something deeper. Recognition. 2 seats down, Coach McCall, the man who had benched Deshawn after the first incident, sat very still. His fists were tight, but his knuckles were white, not from rage, but regret. No one said, "This changes everything." No one clapped. But in the stillness, something had shifted. As students filed out row by row, there was no chatter, no jokes, just quiet, full and strange. Zariah stood slowly. Her legs felt heavy, but not weak. "You all right?" Deshawn asked beside her. She nodded. "Not all right, but I am here." They exited through the main corridor, flanked by the low hum of hallway lights and the distant sound of lockers closing. When Zariah reached her own locker, she stopped. Her breath caught, not from fear this time, but something closer to wonder. Taped to the center of her locker door was a single sheet of white paper. Drawn in blue ink, raw and bold, was the image of a black girl mid-flip, hair flying, eyes locked on an unseen opponent, arms cutting through the air like wings. Around her, a circle of silhouetted hands reached upward, not to drag her down, but to lift her. Someone had taken the moment of violence and transformed it, not into vengeance, but into something almost sacred. Zariah stared at it. Then, slowly, she touched the edge of the drawing. It was unsigned, but it was not silent. It said, "You are seen." And for the first time since arriving in that school, Zariah allowed herself one thing she had held back for too long, a breath that did not hurt. Zariah closed her locker. The bell rang, but she did not move. Behind her, the voices of students had changed, quieter, watching. She stepped forward into the hallway, and the poster behind her stayed, a symbol not of what had broken, but of what had refused to kneel. The church basement smelled of pine-scented cleaner and memory. It was Wednesday evening. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the stained glass windows of New Light Baptist Church. Inside, the folding chairs had been pushed to the wall. A thin blue mat, frayed at the corners, duct tape along one seam, lay unrolled in the center of the room. The floor creaked faintly beneath each step, as if unsure it could carry what had gathered here. Zariah stood barefoot in a loose black t-shirt and sweatpants. Her father's brown belt, worn but clean, was tied across her waist, not for display, but remembrance. She paced the edge of the mat in silence, the way her father once did before class. Not a performance, a promise. They had said no. The school had refused her proposal to start a self-defense program on campus. Liability concerns, they called it. We do not want to encourage confrontation. But Zariah knew what it really meant. So she came here, because when the door to protection is closed, you find a window. And if there is no window, you make space with your hands. One by one, students began to file in. Most were younger than her, freshmen, even 8th graders from the nearby middle school. A few mothers stood quietly at the back, arms folded, eyes tight with watchfulness. A boy with a limp. A girl who flinched when her name was called. No one asked questions. They simply came. Deshaun entered last. He wore a denim jacket dusted with charcoal. In his hands, carefully cradled, was a framed painting. Zariah paused her pacing. "Is that it?" she asked. He nodded, then uncovered it. The painting, titled Forward, was simple in composition but staggering in emotion. Against a background of deep indigo and shadowed red, a line of students stood shoulder to shoulder. None faced the viewer. They faced forward, into the canvas, into the unknown, with backs straight and fists unclenched. Their shadows stretched behind them, swallowed by the darkness they had left. But one figure stood slightly ahead of the rest. A black girl, her arms wrapped in tape, one hand slightly raised, not in warning, but welcome. Zariah swallowed hard. "It belongs here," she whispered. Deshaun smiled faintly. Already spoken to Reverend Hall. He agreed. They hung it on the wall beside the storage closet, between a faded baptism schedule and a fire escape map. No spotlight, no ceremony, just truth on canvas. Zariah stepped back onto the mat, cleared her throat. "Thank you for coming," she said. The room stilled. "I will not ask why you are here. Some of you may know, some of you may not want to say. That is fine. I only ask that for the next 60 minutes, we do not look at who we were yesterday, only at what we are willing to become tomorrow." A few students glanced at one another. Others kept their eyes down. Zariah gestured to the center. "We begin with breath." The group formed a rough circle. Zariah lowered herself onto the mat, legs crossed, spine tall. "Inhale," she said softly. "For 3 seconds. Hold. Exhale." The sound of breath filled the room, hesitant at first, then deeper. When they stood, she demonstrated the basic stances: balance, distance, reaction. She did not show off. She did not mention belts or fights. She spoke with clarity and calm, letting each student feel control not as a weapon, but as something internal, like standing still in a storm and realizing the wind cannot move you anymore. Midway through the class, the basement door creaked open again. Zariah noticed the hesitation in the steps before she turned. It was Brielle. She wore jeans, a hooded sweatshirt, and an expression that carried more weight than her posture allowed. Her eyes flicked briefly across the room, then settled on Zariah. No nod, no words. She slipped into the last row and sat cross-legged at the edge of the mat, silent, watchful, as if trying to decide whether to breathe. Zariah said nothing. She continued the lesson. They practiced breakfalls, rolled from their backs to their feet, learned how to say no with their stance, not their voice. At no point did Zariah call Brielle forward, but she saw her watching, saw her fingers twitch at each wrist movement, saw the hollow behind her eyes that no highlighter could mask. Deshawn sat beside the painting now, sketchbook in hand. He was not drawing them, he was listening the way artists do, beyond sound. When the hour ended, Zariah bowed. "Thank you," she said simply. Most of the students bowed back, some awkwardly. They began to rise, gather shoes, speak in small tones. A few smiled, unsure, but genuine. Brielle did not move. She remained seated, legs crossed, eyes lowered, not in shame, but exhaustion. Zariah walked toward her. Her own hands, still red from the floor, curled into fists at her sides, then released. She did not speak. Instead, she knelt in front of Brielle and held out the extra pair of gloves. The leather was cracked, the padding worn, but they were clean, whole. Brielle looked up. The moment stretched between them like a string between two trembling bridges. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Zariah still said nothing. She simply held the gloves. Brielle reached for them. Her fingers touched the edge, then paused, trembled, and in the stillness her eyes shimmered. Not with pride, not with apology, but with something even heavier, recognition. She took the gloves. Her voice broke as she whispered, "I do not know how to fight." Zariah replied softly, "Then we will begin together." Brielle nodded once. Her thumb brushed the glove's stitching. She did not wipe the tear that slid down her cheek, and Zariah did not look away. Because in that moment, no audience, no phone, no applause, the real flip had begun. 3 months later, the wind no longer howled against the windows of Willow Ridge High. It whispered, softly, as if the building itself had begun to listen. The school gymnasium, once echoing with mockery, stifled laughter, and silence too thick to name, was now filled with chairs lined in careful rows. The banners hanging above the bleachers read, "Safe School Reform Initiative, Community Assembly." Underneath them, spotlights bathed the stage in soft gold. No one stood on it yet. But something was different in the air, not a performance, a reckoning. Zariah sat in the third row, her mother beside her, hands folded neatly in her lap. On the other side sat Reverend Hall, and just behind them were the mothers who had stood with hers in that first meeting, Marissa's mother, Imani's aunt, Mrs. Carson from the South Side. The seats were nearly full. Parents, students, teachers, a local attorney from the Community Justice Initiative, even Principal Dunning, though he stood off to the side, arms crossed, expression unreadable. At the back of the room, a new mural had been painted above the water fountain. A girl mid-air, caught mid-motion, her foot extended in a quiet arc, not as an attack, but as a turning point. Beneath it, the words, "Stillness is power, courage is action." The lights dimmed, a hush settled over the gym. The assembly began not with a speech, but with a video. Deshawn had edited it the night before. The screen flickered to life with quiet footsteps echoing across tile. A hallway, a locker, a moment. But this was not the flip. This was not violence replayed. It was movement rewound, played backward like a river running uphill. Laughter faded into silence, shoves reversed into stillness. The moment of cruelty became a pause, a breath, a chance to choose again. Then it stopped, and in its place, a single slide. You are not what happened. You are what you choose now. When the lights returned, a few people were already wiping at their eyes. No one clapped, but something in the room shifted. A woman stepped onto the stage. Zariah recognized her immediately, Miss Ingram, the humanities teacher who had been present in the cafeteria that day but had looked away. She clutched a piece of folded paper in both hands. Her voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. "I have been a teacher here for 13 years. And for 13 years, I believed neutrality was safety." Her eyes scanned the crowd. But silence was not safe. It was a weapon I handed to the wrong people. She unfolded the paper slowly, walked down the steps, handed it directly with both hands to Zariah. Zariah accepted it without a word. Miss Ingram met her eyes. Her voice broke as she whispered, "You taught me silence hurts more than speaking ever could." Zariah blinked. Once, then nodded. The program continued. No grandstanding, no promises, just acknowledgments. What happened? What failed? What must change? After the assembly ended, people stayed seated. Not to be polite, but because they were thinking. Ryder did not attend the event, but his name came up. In quiet corners, in hushed phrases, Zariah had heard what he had been doing, working weekends at the women's shelter downtown, driving his mother to and from therapy groups, volunteering at the intake desk, silent, reliable. He never introduced himself, never told his story, but the counselors knew. Sometimes, healing did not need to announce itself, it just needed to show up. Zariah's mother squeezed her hand. "We did this," she said. Zariah did not respond. She only turned to look back at the gym one last time before stepping outside. But the story did not end in a speech or a ceremony. It continued, in practice. The next morning, the gym was rearranged again, not for a basketball game, not for punishment, but for practice. The self-defense program had been approved, not on paper, not with applause, but with keys. Coach Letts unlocked the storage room himself and handed the mats to Zariah. No commentary, just trust. It was early, barely past 6 o'clock in the morning, but a dozen students had already arrived. Some she recognized, others were new. No one spoke much. She did not stand at the front like a master. She stood among them. "Ready?" she asked, her voice a calm breath through the dust-specked light. One by one, they nodded. She raised her hands gently. "One breath," she said. They inhaled. Together. One stance. They grounded their feet, their bodies aligned, eyes forward. One choice. They exhaled, soft, firm, steady. She said no more. They moved into drills, simple, fluid, nothing flashy, just awareness, balance, timing. And then it happened. A quiet moment in the far corner of the mat. A girl no older than 14 had her back turned. Another student, playing the attacker, reached up, grabbed a fistful of her hair in jest. In the past, that would have sparked laughter, or a phone, or worse. But this time, she did not flinch. She did not cry. She pivoted. Her body rotated with quiet precision, her elbow anchoring down, wrist tracing a practiced arc. The grip broke. She stepped away. Not with vengeance, with control. The room froze. No phones recorded. No one cheered. They just watched. And then returned to practice. Because the cycle had not been broken by violence. It had been broken by discipline, by choice, by a girl who once stood alone and now stood among. Zariah did not speak again until the session ended. She walked the mat, offering gloves, correcting posture, encouraging breath. As the students began to roll up the mats, she stood in the center. Her eyes swept across them, not as a warrior, not as a savior, but as someone who had learned what legacy truly meant. She whispered, "Ready? One breath, one stance, one choice." They stood straighter. The cycle was not gone. But now it had resistance. And resistance, when practiced in unity, became transformation. A student's hair is yanked by another during sparring. Her eyes widen, but she remembers. A breath, a pivot, a step. She twists, breaks free. The grip falls. No camera flashes. No crowd gasps. Just the soft sound of feet returning to stance. And behind her, the others keep training. No one watches. Because now, everyone is learning. In the quiet moments after the final frame fades, what lingers is not the flip, not the headline, not even the applause. It is the breath before it, the choice made in silence. For Zariah, the story was never about strength measured by fists or views. It was about the courage to not become what had hurt her, about rising not just above, but through what tried to break her. In a town where cruelty wore a smile and silence wore a badge, Her greatest victory was not what she did to others, but what she awakened in them. A girl who walked into school invisible, who was told to shrink, to stay silent, to not fight back, who saw her reflection mocked, then remade it into something others could see themselves in. A boy like Deshaun, whose own wounds had been buried in concrete and dusk, finally found a voice not in revenge, but in truth. Even Ryder, once a name etched in fear, stood in a hallway and said, "You taught me how to be cruel, not to justify the past, but to stop it from echoing into another soul." And Brielle, her silence never weakness, only waiting, took the gloves with trembling hands and joined the circle. No hashtags, no heroes, just one girl flipping a cycle. It makes you wonder, how many stories like this never get told? How many hallway whispers go unchallenged? How many students walk home carrying bruises no camera ever sees? But sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stand in stillness, to say, "No more." Not louder, just clearer. And maybe that is what this story leaves behind. Not just inspiration, but invitation. An invitation to notice, to speak, to break cycles, one stance at a time. So now, we pass the question to you. What would you have done in that cafeteria? What does courage look like in your school, your workplace, your family? And when the next moment comes, because it will, what choice will you make? Let us know in the comments. Share your story, your breath, your stance. You never know who needs to hear it. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of something unspoken, join us. Subscribe. Not just to follow the next story, but to be part of the change they carry forward. Because sometimes the most powerful flips do not happen in the air, they happen in the heart.